Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Jamming with Jason. Today, I have back my friend Brian Ahearn. And for those of you that have been listening to the podcast for years now, I know years, it's been like 5 years. This is probably, I don't know, maybe the fourth time that Brian's been on, and he's just coming out with a new book that I have here, and you'll be able to see online too. His story, my story, our story, and the subtitle is Eternal Lessons of Fatherhood, Sacrifice, and Service. So, Brian, I'm grateful to have you back. I don't have very many guests on the podcast anymore. Um, but I just always love the energy that you bring and the person that you are, and so I'm honored to have you back.
Well, I'm
Um,
excited to be here, and I still remember vividly the lunch in California. That was probably what, 4 years ago, at least
oh
5 years.
yeah. It was that was a good time, and yeah, I appreciated seeing you in person. And when I make it back to West Virginia, which is like there's two states I haven't been to, West Virginia and Hawaii. I'm
Mhm.
going to make sure and swing by Ohio to be able to see you. I've got another friend actually that lives kind of in that area too. So
Well, we've got a guest room if you need a place.
yeah, there you go. All right. Well, yeah, I wanted to, it's exciting. And like I said, I mean, so you can, everybody that's listening, you can kind of see the book, but I wanted to talk about that because we're both fathers. We both have fathers, right? And as we were talking before, I think fatherhood sometimes is not really talked about that candidly, or and maybe that there's a lot of misconceptions out there. And I think a lot of us as fathers maybe feel like we haven't done the best that we could. So I'm excited. You wrote a whole book, now about your dad, which again, it's kind of a different genre of what you've been, what you've written in your previous book. So maybe kind of help us understand why this topic and the story that you want to share here with people.
Well, my father and I, we had a rough go of it for a while, and we got over the hump and ended up with a wonderful relationship. He passed away in September of 2020. And as I was looking over a document that he had given me, I don't know, 8 or 10 years prior to that, I think, which was about his time in the Marine Corps and Vietnam, where he went, what he saw and experienced, people he met and things. I thought I wanted to write a book to help other Marines. So my dad made a lot of mistakes, suffered from PTSD. It wasn't as apparent as some people, and it had a really bad impact on my mom, and it ended up splitting up our family. Um, and I just thought, if some young guy reads the book and avoids those mistakes, then it's all worth it. If a Marine family reads the book and understands that Marine in their life a little bit better, maybe they'll be able to extend grace or do things a little bit differently. And so hopefully to bring two people, two sides, I guess, together.
Yeah.
That was kind of the impetus of it, but it seems like it evolved a little bit more. When I was working with my editor, she told me, she said, "Hey, you've got something really good here, and it goes beyond just Marines and Marine families, the story, because so many people can relate to it." And so I'm really hoping for an even wider audience than just Marines.
Mhm. Well, and I think it's interesting because as you brought it up, I think, as fathers, we tend to try to be stoic and kind of hide a lot of the emotions that we're going through. And so it's interesting, and maybe this was the same for you, but I remember one of my friends that I worked with, 20 plus years ago now. I remember him talking about he had an opportunity to go to DC to work for a while. And so his dad came and visited him, and they went to the Vietnam Memorial together. And just the healing that his dad got, and his dad opened up to him about some things that he had no idea about, right? I mean, some of the experiences that his dad went through while he was there in Vietnam, the nightmares and other things that he would continue to have his whole life that he just never told, their mom or the kids about. He just held this all in. And it's interesting, now we have much more of an understanding about things like PTSD, And I think I'm hopeful that maybe we're a lot more compassionate towards those who serve, right? I mean, my son served in the Army, my partner's son served in the Army. I've had several nephews in the Air Force and one in the Marines still. And I think, sometimes we just don't really understand, and especially the older generation with Vietnam, what those men went through and how they kind of held it all inside. So I don't know if you had kind of some similar experiences with your dad.
Absolutely. For the longest time, he didn't talk about it. And I understand now. I mean, after he opened up, and I can understand why he wanted to put some things just in the rearview mirror and not think about them anymore. But as he wrote in his section, PTSD is real, and veterans suffer with it every day. In my dad's case, his brother sent me an email, and it was really interesting, where he said, when your dad came home from the war, we thought he was unaffected by it. He just didn't seem to be any different. His career took off. You guys moved out to California. Everything seemed to be going great. Well, you're 4,000 miles away. He didn't know about some of the physical abuse and the verbal abuse and the things that were happening, the infidelity, and none of those are good things, and no justification at all for that. But as I wrote the book and thought about my father in Vietnam, 23 years old in the jungles there in Vietnam, and seeing people killed and blown up, and all the things that he went through, and having come from a family with an alcoholic father, I had to question, I don't know how I would have handled all that. And so when he came back, while he would by day, be the business person who was doing really well, things were different at night and on the weekends. And one story that typifies this, Jason, was one of his brothers told me at his funeral, and I write about this in the book. He said, your dad got me an interview in 1969. I flew out for this interview. Dad picks me up at the airport Friday afternoon. He said, we went straight to the bars, pool halls, strip clubs, slept on the beach, woke up, did it all again, and got to your house Sunday afternoon. And he kind of laughed, because it does make for like a hangover story.
Right. Another movie, right?
Yeah. But I told him, I said, Kevin, that's why mom was so angry all the time. And it seemed to give him a moment of clarity. And he just said, you know what? She had a right to be. And
Yeah.
so nobody was talking about those things, right? And so it'd be really easy to think like, oh, here's a ex-Marine just going out and partying and having fun. But I think he was trying to deal with the stuff that's inside that comes with PTSD, and that was one of his outlets.
Mhm. Yeah, because any addictive behavior in general, or any I don't know, whatever you'd call it, behaviors like that, right? That end up having a detrimental effect, are usually escape, or ways for them to try to escape, right? And again, it's hard on the family, it's hard on the spouse, but when you stop and kind of think about it, it's understandable maybe why some of those things happen, especially as men, where we feel like we got this.
Mhm.
I mean, your dad was a Marine. It's like you just get it done. You pull up your big boy pants. It doesn't matter. You just kind of push through. But it's like at some points, it's like it becomes so unbearable trying to deal with this on our own.
Mhm. Yeah, and unfortunately, the ball of yarn was so tangled with my parents. There was going to be no way my mom was going to be able to be that person to help him out of that, because she was getting the brunt of it.
Mhm.
And it was when he met my stepmom, who he ended up being married to for 38 years, who was all removed from that situation. And somehow, and she doesn't even, I think, realize what she may have done, probably just being empathetic and listening. And I think he started opening up to her, and he did write that it was about 10 years after he was out of the service that he was finally able to go to a Marine function. And then he started attending the Marine Corps balls and marching in parades. He was able to go back and kind of embrace the Marines and the person that they made him into, but he had to kind of overcome those demons, and an empathetic, loving ear, I think, helped him start to move in that direction. But there was no way that my mom was going to be able to be that person, because again, when you're the subject of physical abuse and verbal abuse and other things, you don't have much empathy for that person because you're being hurt and you just want that hurt to stop.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Well, and so it's, like I said, thanks for kind of highlighting that, because I see that in certain people that I know too, that you can tell that they're hurting. And a lot of times, their behaviors, often so much of the time we take it out on the people that we love the most, which is unfortunate. And I think it's, somewhat because we think they can take it. But there comes a point usually when you can't, right? And so it's like, um, yeah, just really interesting to highlight. And I think that, what your stepmom did with the empathy, a lot of times that's what we can't fix it, right? I mean, we couldn't fix what your dad went through, but if somebody at least could empathize with them, understand it a little bit, that helps ease it from them. And I think, again, as you were talking here, I think there's another kind of area to go into, which is because I kind of get the sense of the kind of dad you are by seeing your posts on Facebook, and things like that. And what's always interesting is I heard you say, your dad, so your grandfather was an alcoholic,
Mhm.
so there kind of starts to become kind of this family legacy of, how we deal with it, right? So your dad learned from your grandfather, well, when things get tough, you just turn to the bottle, right? And it reminds me of the movie Christmas Vacation. I just watched it, this last Christmas, and there was that scene where, Chevy Chase is talking to his dad, and he's like, "Dad, you always had like perfect Christmases. How did you do it?" And he chuckles and he said, "I had a little help from Jack Daniels." And it's a joke, but it's not a joke,
Yeah.
for a lot of families. And kind of seeing some of that generational stuff. I mean, the title says lessons, right? Sacrifice and service. So, what are some of the things that you learned, about fatherhood? Um, because I can't remember if we hit record before or not, but we learn from the good, the bad, and the ugly of all people. And so, what are some of the things that you've taken from it and maybe done the same as your dad, maybe some things that you've done different because of your dad as well, to kind of make you into the man and the father you are now?
Well, I did a lot of things differently. I had seen a long time ago, there were certain things that I did not want to lay on my daughter. It became more apparent when I wrote the book because it started to become so clear to see these patterns repeating.
Mhm.
And I was so thankful that I was making choices not to do that. In fact, I dedicated the book to our daughter because I believe that by my wife and I parenting different, and not that our parents were terrible or anything, but looking at what they did good and trying to retain that, and then trying to remove the bad. And I think that we've produced a much better human being because of those efforts, and I reap the rewards of that all the time. In fact, my daughter's 28; she's married, but she was away with my wife this weekend, and when she got home, she just hugged me like a 12-year-old. I mean, she was squeezing my cheek. Oh, we missed you. And it was just so nice to have that affection from my adult daughter. And I think a lot of that goes back to how we raised her. She just turned out to be healthy and happy. And when we talk about like, hey, we're not perfect, so what should we have done different? She said, nothing. She goes, you could have pressured me more in school and certain things, and it wouldn't have made a difference. She goes, you did a great job. And so that is so nice to hear, but it didn't happen by chance. It was a focused effort on both of our parts.
Mhm. Well, and so what were some of those things that you focused on doing different? That, I mean, because again, I don't know if you realize how rare it is, Brian, to have an adult child say, "Nope, you did pretty much everything right." Most of the time, it's not, right? I mean, because one of the guys that I knew, when I was a young dad, he was older, he had adult kids, and he said, "Jason, unfortunately, kids don't come with an owner's manual, and each kid is different. But here's what I can tell you: you do the best you can." But invariably, probably each kid, there's going to be something, that they think was something that you did that screwed them up, So it shows something about the maturity of your daughter to realize that, but also a lot of the stuff that you did that actually worked, that maybe, again, other parents that are listening to this can learn from the lessons that you had, because it's not my experience with my
Well,
kids.
I can tell you one example that really comes right to mind. My grandfather was a professor at a number of prestigious colleges, including NYU and um, Baruch College.
Uh-huh.
So he was really hard on his boys when it came to grades. And literally, like my father's oldest brother, he was second line. His oldest brother, Cornelius, who went by Corny, would come home with like a 95 on the test, and his dad would berate him. Why didn't you get 100? You're an Ahearn. And that triggered a thought that when I was in seventh grade and I had come home with or I'm eighth grade, something like that, but I'd come home with a report card, 6 A's and a C. And the first thing my dad said was, "What happened in English?" Now, it wasn't in this mean tone or anything, but it set something in motion, a perfectionism within me that, nothing's good enough. And I'll tell you one way that I write about in the book that played out. When I was very immersed in church and our faith and leading Bible studies and things, I really wanted to understand the Bible for myself. So every day I would read and I would read commentaries. And I basically put together my own commentary, about 1,000 pages. I mean, I
Hmm.
dove in deep. And there was one thing I struggled with where I could not figure out the answer. Well, as fate would have it, my wife and I are at a party one night. We meet somebody, we're talking about Christianity. And wouldn't you know, the person brings up the one thing that I could not find an answer to. And because I couldn't answer him, I felt humiliated. And I cried when I told my wife that night. I said, I feel humiliated. That perfectionism was not a good thing. So when our daughter was in high school, freshman year, she was getting pretty good grades, but she had a D going in science when we were at like the 6 week mark and we went and met the teachers. And I just bit my lip. I wasn't going to say anything. I wasn't going to say, what's going on. I was just going to keep treating her like I did and loving her. And she brought that grade up and she graduated and did well in school. She never liked it. But I did not want to place that burden on her about, hey, you're not doing good enough here. What I needed to do was love her and encourage her. And that's why I think a big part of why she's just so happy and outgoing and loving.
Hmm. Well, that's a great example because it's, again, it's a so much of the time we do things because we think we're helping our kids, making them tough. Like your grandfather's generation, it was, about toughening up the kids, right? In a lot of ways. I mean, I think probably some of the reason for some corporal punishment, at the time when I was little too, was to make us stronger. In some ways, it was obviously to punish us, but in their way of thinking, it also made us stronger because we could handle, the pain a little bit more. And sometimes, again, like you said, it's understandable, your grandfather is a professor and, really pushing. You can kind of understand that from a grade perspective. Then your dad eased off a little bit, but even still, what seemed to be probably for him an innocent comment didn't land on you as being so innocent.
Yeah. And another thing to say about that, for as smart as his older brother was, and he had become an attorney, my dad barely got out of high school. He finished, I think it was 121st out of 123 in his class. And he was humiliated by his father because he went down to have lunch with him. He says his mom had to beg the people at Fairfield, now Fairfield College, now Fairfield University, to allow him in. And because he had gone to a parochial school, they relented and they let him in. So my dad goes downtown to have lunch with his father, and he's sitting in the waiting area next to the secretary, and he overhears somebody say, "Hey, I hear your son's going to Fairfield." And his father says, "Yeah, he won't last 6 months." And he said that literally the secretary cried and he had to comfort her. But my dad took it and was kind of like, I'm going to stick this up your, you know what? And he ended up making the dean. And he was really intelligent. I mean, he's one of the smartest people I knew. He was well read on history and spoke different languages. That was the kick in the butt that he needed, but it was humiliating. You can't feel good about that. And so I never wanted to humiliate our daughter, but I would push her. So as an example, we did taekwondo together for many, many years. We're stretching one day, and the master of the school comes over and he says, "Hey, Abigail, there's a competition Saturday. I want you to participate." And she said, "Master Black, I really don't want to." And he said, "I want you to." And she goes, "Master Black, I really don't want to." And he goes, "We'll talk about it after class." So she turns to me and she says, "Dad, can't we say we're busy?" And I'm like, "No, you're not going to lie. If you don't want to do it, you look him in the eye and you tell him." And so the three of us went out of the studio after the class, and he had good reasons for why he wanted her to do it, but it wasn't something she was comfortable with. And so she held her ground. She said, I understand that, Master Black, but I'm gonna have to say no. So I felt like I was teaching her. I was there, so she had confidence, Dad's there, but I was teaching her to stand up for herself. So when we talk about toughening kids up, I think for her, toughening up was, I know I have the love and support of my mom and dad. So even if I make a mistake, they're going to be there for me, and she'll deal with the consequences, but they'll still be there for me. And that's why, as nice and bubbly and outgoing as she is, she will stand up for herself immediately, and she will stand up for other people immediately if she thinks something's not right. And I'm really proud of that.
Well, because that was a great learning moment for you as a father,
Oh,
right? Because like
absolutely.
you said, she always knew that you were going to be there to support. But the important thing is you said you're not going to lie about it. If you don't want to go, you have to look him in the eye and tell him, right? Because again, that's a lesson that most of us don't learn. I mean, most adults, we're lying all the time just to get out of something that we don't want to do. And it would have been very, very easy for you to just say, "Oh yeah, well, we can't, we have the family thing on Saturday," or whatever it was, right? And be able to get her out of it. But then that would have taught her something different, right?
And and then as she got older too, she may have looked back too and said, "Wow, Dad kind of went against the values that he espouses." Not that I'm
Yeah.
perfect by any means, but to me, it was just a clear opportunity in the moment to teach her something and to support her. And there are numerous other stories I could share that were similar to that, where I think she just knew mom and dad have my back, and they love me, and even if I fall flat on my face, they're going to be there to help me, and we'll try again.
Yeah, well, and I think it's funny, and maybe this is one of the learnings for people too, is to never kind of underestimate the impact of what seems to be a small teaching that you don't even almost realize is a teaching, just like that example.
Yeah.
Because as you were saying that, I was remembering a story with my mom. And so I was either it must have been like first grade. I mean, you remember going, when you get ready to go to school in the fall and you go out and you have to do all your Christmas or your school shopping, right? So you got to get your pencils and your little school box and lunch box and all the different things that you're supposed to bring to school with you. And so I remember, we were in Kmart and got a bunch of stuff, and I think I was sitting in the cart or doing something, and I was kind of playing with this plastic like school supply box, like we used to have. And I was kind of playing with it, and I'd put some stuff inside the box, right? And when we ended up getting home, my mom was unpacking all the groceries or all the stuff, and she opened it up and she saw that there were some things inside the box. And she went over and she grabbed the receipt and looked through, and she's like, "Oh, these things are not on the receipt." And so she's like, "Jason, what did you do?" thing. I mean, I felt like I'd done something wrong. I was just a kid probably playing and didn't even realize, but it was the old days where they didn't like open up everything. And so for whatever reason, those things didn't get charged. So I remember her putting me in the car
Mhm.
and going down to Kmart. And here I was, probably this 6-year-old boy, and she gave me the box, and I had to go up and explain to the person in customer service that, "I'm sorry, I put these things in the box, and Apparently we didn't pay for them when we need to pay for them now. Traumatic feel for me as a kid at that time, when I hadn't really done anything wrong, but that example of my mom and making me get in the car and go back down, because we lived a little ways away too. So it wasn't like it was just going around the corner. In 10 minutes, we were back home. It was an hour probably, right? But that she took that opportunity. And I don't know if she even realized that she was actively teaching me, but that has stuck with me my whole life. And I always pay, for everything that I get,
Yeah.
because of that. And so it's interesting like that. A lot of times the simple things like that, Taekwondo competition, those are some simple little things to teach our kids that have a huge impact, much more than we would ever expect.
I had a similar story to yours when I was growing up too, and I think it instilled a really strong sense of right and wrong. And so I've been out before, and I get my bill, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, hey, I don't think you put my two scotches on, or whatever. It ended up costing me a good bit more. And the person's always like, oh, thank you so much. And they rerun the bill, and I happily pay it. I don't want them to, because they made a mistake or something happened, to suffer for that. But I just wouldn't feel right um, not paying for something. And so when I catch it, I make sure that we pay it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, like I said, it's interesting the little things that we remember, right, from our childhood like that. And sometimes it's the things that our parents don't even remember even happened,
Yeah.
along the way. But I did want to ask you too, because I know, you said with your dad, for a while it wasn't good. And then you kind of reconciled and things were good, at the end of his life before he passed. But maybe kind of, walk us through a little bit of that, because there's a lot of us who are kind of estranged from our kids. I mean, I'm one of those people. I have four kids, three of which I haven't talked to since the first divorce. And there's a lot of reasons probably why, but for whatever reason, they haven't felt the need to kind of come back, if you will. So maybe kind of walk, because a lot of us end up in kind of this situation too, where we do the best that we could. And like in my situation, I had to distance myself from the three of my kids that went to live with my ex, because she was trying to kind of pit us against each other. And so I couldn't have the kids playing both sides. It wouldn't be fair for them. It wouldn't be fair for their mother. But obviously that had consequences to me, and that I haven't had contact with them for 15 years, right? So maybe if you can just kind of share a little bit, what was your and your dad's story, kind of with this, because I think a lot of times, at some point in adult children's lives, they want to kind of reconcile with their parents and understand. And how does that look? How does that work?
Well, for me, growing up, in spite of many things that I knew in my head, especially as I got into my teens, I really admired my dad. I mean, he was tough as nails, Marine, really successful, fit, much younger than most of the other parents because they had us when they were pretty young. So I really looked up to him. And it was at my 30th birthday where everything changed. And I detail this in the book, where because life had changed for Jane and I in terms of our faith and our marriage, and all kinds of really good things were going on. And my dad was going to come down for my 30th birthday. And I had asked if he would just spend the weekend with us because Sunday was Easter, and we really wanted to show him the church we were going to and meet some of our friends. And he was insistent on not wanting to go. And he kept saying, I don't have any reasons, I just don't want to go. And I just was pressing him. It was so important to me. Well, we ended up having another phone conversation. He told me conveniently, he goes, look, I'm at an airport. I've got to catch a flight. If you want to talk about this, call me when I get home. I don't think he thought I'd call, but I did. And I really started kind of pressing it and saying, like, why won't you go? And of course, he kept insisting, I don't have any reasons. Well, at some point in the conversation, he slipped up and he goes, I have my reasons. And I said, what are they? And he goes, I don't want to talk about it. And I said, well, wait a minute. You just told me we could talk open and honest about anything. I want to talk about this. And he blew up. He goes, look, I know more about GD religion than you'll know in your whole effing life. And I don't care what you or anybody else says. I'm not a bad person. And I said, Dad, I never called you a bad person. And he goes, in so many words you have, I think it was guilt. Um, and I said, well, that's just something else we got to talk about because life doesn't always go click. And he hung up. And in that moment, Jason, rage overtook me. It's like everything I knew about what had transpired between him and my mom dropped from my head to my heart. And
Mhm.
my first thought was, he lived about 45 minutes away. My first thought is, I'm going to get in the car and I'm going to go destroy him. And I was much bigger back then. I was probably about 225 pounds. I had been competing in bodybuilding and stuff. And yet, truthfully, he probably would have kicked my ass because he was just that tough. But that's where everything changed, and I was not going to let go of it. I wasn't going to just go play some golf, drink beers, tell some stories and jokes, and act like everything was cool. It wasn't, and I started to feel like I needed answers. I wanted to understand why I was the way I was. I wanted to be the best husband I could be, and down the road, the best father. So we started getting together, and like one night we had just had a really tense conversation, and I was just point blank asking him, why did you cheat on mom? Why did you hit her? Why this? And he couldn't wrap his mind around why I wanted to go there. So I said to him, I said, Dad, what would you do if I hit Joe? That's his wife. He leans across the table and he goes, how frank can I be in my language, Jason?
Your dad was a Marine. I understand. Yeah.
He leans across the table and he looks me in the eye. He goes, if I find out you've ever laid a hand on her, I will effing kill you.
Yeah.
And I go, what if it was 5 years ago? He goes, I don't care when it was. I'm going to effing kill you if I find out you've touched her. And I said, good. Now you know how I feel about the divorce. It doesn't matter that it was 12 years ago. For me, it's right now.
Yeah.
And I give him credit because he could have just said, screw you and gone away. And he didn't. And I didn't let it go. And we had many years that were tense, but we started getting to a good place. And I think my questions were a big part of why he wrote this lengthy document about his time in the Corps in Vietnam. And he gave it to me. So that would have been 14 years ago. But he gave it to me and he said, maybe this will answer some questions. Maybe it'll raise some more. And that is a big part of the book. You'll read about in his own words why he went in the Corps and who he met in Vietnam and returned and all of that. The other thing, Jason, that's really interesting about the book too is I had to keep a lot of journals like in high school and early college. So I literally have firsthand writing from a 15-year-old the day after the final fight. We're screaming and yelling and things are breaking and literally what a 15-year-old thought. And I literally have written down what I was thinking the day he moved out and how is it going to impact me and my discipline, my grades, and all this stuff that you probably don't think 15-year-olds are thinking about, but we do.
We do. Yeah.
And I've got it firsthand right there in the book. So that was really interesting to reread all of that. But that was kind of our progression that as I read that document and he opened up and shared things with me, I totally understand why he wanted to put that in a box and leave it all behind. But there were things I needed to know to really gain that respect back for him. And I will share one story that's in the book, and I really reference it in his eulogy. When he was in the Marines and he was over in Vietnam in 1965, he was there for 13 months. He was an intelligence officer. And the South Vietnamese had captured a Viet Cong soldier and he had been gut shot. So he was going to die. And he said that this man, they were out in the hot sun and the South Vietnamese commander is just brutalizing this guy, kicking him and trying to get information out of him. My dad said he couldn't take it anymore. And he, through an interpreter, told the commander to stop, and he wouldn't. And so he said he pulled his revolver out and he put it to his head. He said, I'll blow your effing head off if you kick him again. And then he said, that the guy had died in his arms under a tree. And my faith says, you know, that while we were enemies, Christ died for us. And that was a godly thing to do. For me, it said he had not fully lost his moral compass, even though he did a lot of bad crap.
Yeah.
There was a part of him that still understood what the right thing was. And he really instilled that in me. For all of his faults, he instilled right and wrong in me. And I owe that to him and my mom too. But I thought that's the person I needed to know, the person who would step in to help anybody if it's the right thing to do. And I'm proud to call that person my father. If I didn't understand some of these things, Jason, it would have been real easy to just say he was a jerk. What a jerk, and pass it all off. But I don't look at him that way. And again, I don't trivialize any of the things that my mom went through. It was terrible. But I can extend grace. And once I was able to extend grace, then forgiveness came. And with forgiveness came reconciliation. And so that was the path. And I will say that by the end of his life too, he was a very different person, because when we were at his funeral and all these people were saying wonderful things and people talking about him taking their kids fishing and doing certain things, Jane, my wife, asked me, she goes, does it bother you that he didn't do all that with you? And I said, no, I'm happy. It would have been sad if he hadn't changed, but he changed into somebody that people really enjoyed being around. And I think that's the trajectory we're all on, right? We're all growing and changing. And some people have done worse things than you or I, and you and I have done worse things than some other people. But it's, are we moving in the direction where people can say, thank God for you, because you whatever it was you did, you helped me, that you became, for me, I will say, more of a godly person, more of somebody who was Christ-like. And so I was very happy to hear those stories.
Yeah, no, and I mean, there's a lot in there to kind of unpack too that I'd kind of like to go back into a little bit, because it's the one thing about that story of your dad in Vietnam and showing, like you said, his humanity, his understanding that yes, that's the enemy, but this guy is dying, he's in pain, we're not going to get anything out of him, stop it, right? And then to have him have the compassion to hold the man as he died. We're both gonna cry on this one. Hey, what's new, right? But because as somebody passes out of this world, the last part of it they have to do themselves. But to have somebody there comforting you as you're going out, wow.
Yeah.
I mean, those are innumerable eternal blessings for your dad and for that man who he helped. Um, and I think it's so easy for us as humans to look at some of the bad things, quote unquote, that we do to each other. And there's, I mean, like you said, not to excuse any behavior, but when we can see another person and see the humanity in them and remember that
Mhm.
and give them a little grace, because I think you said that was your process, right? Grace, forgiveness, reconciliation. Until you could see and give your dad that grace, right? You couldn't really forgive him and you couldn't really reconcile everything. And I think, especially for men, we don't want to go there. I know I don't want to go there. I've got demons from my past that still keep cropping up. I mean, that I talk about with my current partner that I'm working through myself, right? And a lot of times we don't want to go there. But I think the example that you gave too with your dad about that Easter Sunday and how you were just so enraged, right? And it took you a few times of having some tense conversations with each other to let those emotions kind of come out in a healthy way, right? So much of the time, our emotions come out in a not healthy way. We go and we get drunk. We kick the dog. We beat the wife. We beat the children. We yell. We whatever, right? As people, the people do those things, right? Because we don't know how else to deal with it. And until we can get to that point to where you can feel it and then push through it and give yourself and give others grace, that forgiveness and reconciliation doesn't overcome.
Yeah.
And so we're like holding on to these things, and we feel like sometimes that we're just going to explode.
Yeah. And speaking of exploding, like when I was in high school, I'm a junior in high school, and on the exterior, if you would have looked at me, you'd have said, good kid, good grades, doesn't get in trouble. I was named captain of the football team for the upcoming senior year. Um, and I had an incident in the library, and the librarian and I had words, and she just basically said, "Look, if you don't like it, leave." I didn't just leave it there. I stood up in front of the whole library. I go, "Fine, I don't give a damn. I'm getting the hell out of here." And I stormed out. She's not going to let that go. So she goes out the other door, and she gets hold of me and takes me to an office and gives me every opportunity to apologize. And I was so angry that I wouldn't. Now, Jason, if you or he or anybody else would have said, "I think this has to do with your parents and what's happening at home," I would have been like, "No way, she's just a bitch."
Mm-hmm.
Because there's no way a 17-year-old is going to be able to pull all that stuff together. And so I refused, and I was kicked out of school for 3 days and didn't make National Honor Society. Almost lost my opportunity to be a captain. Thank God my coach understood things and gave me a second chance. Um, but that was a lesson that I taught Abigail, because I said, "You know what, Abigail, when you see kids in school, especially in high school, and they're doing stupid stuff, you never know what's going on at home. And there's almost always something going on, because normally kids don't do some of the crazy risky stuff that they're doing, but they need some outlet for something that they can't express." And so that enabled her to have a lot more grace for kids when she saw them doing things that she clearly knew were self-destructive and bad or wrong. So it became a good teaching lesson. And to bring it full circle, this is awesome. I found the librarian. I Googled and I found her. She's living in Florida. I called her up during the process of the book and said, "Is this Linda Russa?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "I don't know if you remember me, Brian Ahearn." She's like, "Oh, Brian, how are you? I remember you." And she was asking how things were. And I told her about the book. And I said, and I wrote about the incident in the library. And I just wanted to apologize. And she said, "If you would have apologized back then, it would have been over, but you didn't, and you needed to learn a lesson, but I'm so thankful." And we had a wonderful conversation. And it made me feel good to kind of unburden, but even more so because I knew how she felt. And it had to feel so good that 40 years later, this person's calling up and apologizing for something like, "Oh, he learned the lesson."
Yeah. Well, and I think you're a good example, Brian. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I love you so much and why I get on here and cry with you, because I think there's a lot of things that we've done or that we haven't done in our lives, and we can just push it down. And I know, like I said, it's convenient. That's the way we're taught to be as men, is to just push it down, but it's got to come up at some point.
Yeah.
And it's got to come up in a way that is healthy, that's not hurting other people, that's not, damaging the people around us, and there's different ways, yelling into a pillow and, doing some different things but we have to feel some of that stuff and then give ourselves the grace and move through it, right? Because until we move through it, it stays with us. Um, and
And I
so even that, calling up a librarian, you didn't have to do this from 40 years ago, but it makes you a better person and it makes her a better person because you did that.
well,
Even
and
though,
I
again, it seems like it's such a little thing, it's not such a little thing.
Well, I hope somebody reads a book, somebody listening to this might remember that and say, I'm going to take a chance and I'm going to call this person and apologize and see what that does. My daughter, going back to the whole fatherhood thing, um, we have a really open relationship where we talk about everything. And she read the book, and the next day when we had lunch, I said, "So what did you think of it?" And she said, "I cried." I said, "Would you have cried if it wasn't me?" And she goes, "Yeah, I think I still would have." And we just had a wonderful conversation. But I know all of those things are helping to make her a better person. And then, hopefully she will be able to pass that along. And so these stories are designed to help people. And I'm so thankful that people who pre-read the book didn't just get focused on, wow, what a bastard he was, or at least for a time, but that they see the progression and the change in him, and how I was trying to pass along something better to our daughter. It's an awful lot of what life is about, is to try to help other people and help the next generation be better.
Well, and I think it's great on at least two different levels. What you had mentioned before about the people, at your dad's funeral, and the little kids that he took fishing and the other stuff like that, and the one side of it, for you of being, no, I'm glad he did it. I'm not, there's no hard feelings for the fact that he didn't do that with me. I'm just glad that he did it with someone else, right? So you letting that go, because I think a lot of times as children, we want to hold on to things, right? And most people in that situation probably would have been like, well, what is that? Dad took this other kid fishing and never took me fishing, right? And that just keeps people in that negative space instead of being able to see it from another side like you did of, I'm so grateful that my dad changed and he was able to help these other people, right? And the fact that he changed as well, right? That he became more human, more godlike, more charitable, whatever words you want to use to kind of describe, because that's kind of the hope, right? Is we're getting better all the time. And so the people that know us at the last part of our life, and I know that's probably true for me, right? It's like people that knew me in my 20s versus people that know me now, they'd probably have completely different stories about who I am, right? And I hope they're getting better. I hope they're getting better.
Yeah,
um,
I will say, and I don't write extensively about my mom in the book, but she was never able to forgive. And he's gone now, and she'll never hear the words "I'm sorry." He never uttered them, and cannot now. And that's sad, because it's her own prison that she's trapped in. And I know that when people haven't had to go through something like that, and gone through and then ultimately see the change and been able to forgive, it's almost incomprehensible about, well, if I just utter the words, that doesn't make everything better. It doesn't change how I feel. All those things that go with forgiveness. But in her own way, almost like a PTSD, the things come out, where she just gets incredibly angry, and particularly at me. I have his name. I look a little bit like him, where I catch the brunt of things. And so we haven't really talked but once in the last couple of years, and that was at our daughter's wedding, and it was like two sentences, and where I approached her, and she didn't want anything to do with it. And it's sad, because she's missing out on a lot of holidays and birthdays and fun things. And I wrote her a letter, and that's kind of her love language, writing letters. And I laid it out. I said, Mom, I went through this almost 30 years ago with Dad, and now here we are. It's the elephant in the room. I can't let it go until you get some professional help to try to move forward with forgiveness. We're going to be stuck in the same cycle. And I don't want to be in that cycle anymore, where I catch the brunt of your anger for most of the time doing nothing but just making a decision. And so it's sad. It's really sad. I pray for her every day. I'm like, Lord, I hope she has a good day, but please do bring circumstances, people, situations that might help her see something different, so that she can just be freed of this anger that she's had for all these years. And it's one of those things, Jason, where I'm sure you've seen people can go about their normal lives and be great, but when the triggers happen, and
yeah.
for us, a trigger was our daughter getting married a few years ago, and my mom just flipped out on it. And it's sad, because she was a great mother, and she was an awesome grandmother, and my wife loves her, but we just can't keep putting ourselves in the situation. I can't, of taking the verbal abuse that's not my fault.
Yeah. So much about life. And then now that we both have some gray hair and everything else and reflect a little bit more on it, it's yeah, it's interesting. I mean, because like you said, I'm praying for your mom right now too, as I'm thinking about her, because it's we all just have to let things go. We have to let them go. We have to have that grace for ourselves and for other people, and we have to get to that place of forgiveness so we can reconcile and kind of become whole again. Because when these things happen to us, it's like our soul gets torn apart a little bit,
Yeah.
or we get these little black spots on our soul. And until you do these things, and even, like you said, with forgiveness, a lot of people are like, well, I'm not going to say I'm sorry. They're just words and it doesn't really mean anything.
Mhm.
Well, I guess if that's your intention, then it's probably not going to mean anything. But saying the words with the intention behind it is freeing. It's freeing to say to somebody, please forgive me for the wrongs that I did to you. And they say, you're forgiven, or there's nothing to forgive. And it's like, it just, now sometimes, like you said, with your dad, it took years, of kind of going through some of that tension until you got to that point. And it might with your mom too. But, you know, wouldn't it be wonderful if we can all get there quicker? We can all get there
Yeah.
quicker if we're just quit being so stubborn and just get there a little quicker.
You know,
Um,
the for me, the beginning step, I talked about grace and forgiveness, but it started with faith. That, the things that I had learned when I was deeply enmeshed in church and still every day read and pray and things, um, seeing my own need for forgiveness, then how can I not extend it to somebody else when I've done things? And again, those things may not be terrible to some people, but they may be far worse than other people have done. But regardless, I know that it's not how God wanted me to be. And so therefore I needed his forgiveness. And once I was able to really appropriate that, it became easier to start looking around and saying, who am I not to forgive when I've been forgiven? And
yeah.
and that became the the sequence. And I think it would be really hard. I have a hard time imagining somebody going through forgiving and not having that as a basis. But I'm sure that people do, but that's foreign to me.
Well, and it's interesting because that's kind of one of the built-in teachings from the Lord's Prayer too, is Father, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Right. And so again, it's like, well, there's Jesus actually teaching and giving us, some guidance on, hey, if you want to be forgiven and you want to be forgiven from God and forgive yourself, the way to do it is forgiving others. Because as we start forgiving others and let those things go, and we show that grace and forgiveness to other people, it's easier for us. And just by its nature, we start forgiving ourselves more as well. And so we're healing ourselves, as we're healing others. And that's the beautiful symbiotic nature of the wholeness of spirituality, if you will.
Oh, and when you think about fatherhood, for me, I know how much I love my daughter, how much it means when she gives me those hugs. I think of her. We have a funny thing every day at 12:34 when she was little. We used to say 1, 2, 3, 4, special time. Well, my watch has a timer, so almost every day at 12:34, I'm texting her 1, 2, 3, 4, special time, and it just keeps us connected. So I think about how much I feel and think about her, and then I think, and God is that way and infinitely more towards me. I know
Yeah.
some people have a hard time believing that, but I think much of what we get to go through and experience here teach us things about him that I can say, if I love my daughter this much, how much more God must love me to have created me and to have allowed me to live and all the blessings that come with our opportunity to walk this earth.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and it's I could keep talking. We could keep talking for hours, but I know we both got to get on to our day. But I can't remember the term. I've been trying to think of what the term is actually called, but there's when we were talking about kind of the generational things that kind of pass on, there's a special group of people who break a lot of those interfamily systems that develop over the years. And those people don't get enough credit. So, Brian, I'm giving you credit. I'm telling you, good on you, mate, for breaking some of that and helping your daughter to become who she is, because all of the lives that she touches now will be better because you were her father and you were doing the best you could. Again, I'm sure you made mistakes. She doesn't remember them, so that's good. That's good, right? But it takes a lot of courage to break it. There was a lot of work that went in that you did on your part to be able to do that. So I just want to give you credit for that because, like I said, most of the time we don't hear that, but you have made a huge impact just in the way that you raise your daughter on this world.
I appreciate that. And God has given me a very unique opportunity to change the Ahearn family line because we only had one child. And so she got married a year and a half, almost 2 years ago. But her husband's last name is the same as ours.
Oh, you're gonna be kidding me. Yeah.
So the Ahearn name is going to go on, and she and Tyler have an opportunity to really write that and create this whole different positive legacy.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's not like Smith or Jones, but they're not related. They did the 23andMe.
You did the blood work and made sure that they're not first cousins, so you're okay. All right.
So either God was blessing me with that, or he was playing a funny joke on me because I always tease my wife about how she came from a small town in Southwest Pennsylvania, so close to the West Virginia border that if I hadn't married her when I did, her brother was going to. So I think God's kind of blessing me, but he's getting me back at the same time.
Yeah, no, knowing Jane, I think she would have done just fine. She wouldn't have had to marry her brother. Oh boy. Well, no. So the book, His Story, My Story, Our Story, Eternal Lessons of Fatherhood, Sacrifice, and Service. It's going to be out soon. The best way, I think you said, for people to get the book is to go out to your website. Right? So if you want to give people that.
Yeah, the website is brianahearn.biz, B-I-Z. And so if you go there, you'll get to read testimonials, learn a little bit more about the book, about me. You can pre-order on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Book comes out officially on June 4th. So I'm really hoping it's going to have an impact. I've loved all the work that I do, my influence training and things, but I don't know. To me, this is a chance to have a whole different kind of impact on people, and I've been very excited by people who pre-read the book and what they've had to say.
Well, no, and like I said before, I think when we started, this is a topic that we don't talk a lot about. And I think that, again, as men who are fathers, we try to do our best, but we usually keep it bottled up. People usually feel like that they haven't done a good job, that they've been a bad father, things like that. And so raising a little light onto this subject, some of the things we talked about and things that are in your book, I think is going to help people, help them to heal and to realize and maybe, give themselves and give their parents some grace. Because the things you learn from your father, hey, it's the same with mothers too, right? But guys, we're kind of a different little breed anyway. But Brian, thank you. Any last thoughts that you want to kind of share with people before we have to wrap up today?
First, I would just want to thank you for having me on, Jason. It has been really exciting to talk about this book, and the conversations I'm having all kind of go in different directions. You talk to somebody in the military, they want to get into the whole military stuff. And so it was really fun to talk about fatherhood. That is I think probably one of the defining moments of life was the birth of our daughter. And I've said to people, her getting married was the best day of my life. I mean, it was like things came full circle and together, but I know it won't be the best day. I think the best day is when she has her own children, and to be able to see this whole cycle start again. So I'm very optimistic about the future, and I appreciate that we went in that direction about fatherhood.
Yeah, because like I said, I think it's important. We need to talk about it more. I mean, everybody has a father, everybody has a mother. And, one of my mentors told me, because often we have issues with fathers and mothers. And he would always say, there is only one father, there is only one mother. Right. And, again, depending on what you believe, but we all kind of picked them coming down here in the divine plan. Right. So, how are we taking care of them? What's the relationship that we're having with them? What we can do to be, I don't want to say good children, but maybe compassionate human beings that have grace for our parents, and then that we have grace ourselves as parents if we have children, because it's one of the big lessons and uh, roles that we all play in this world, because everybody's the son or a daughter of a mother and a father. Not everybody has kids, but everybody is a son or daughter of a mother and father. So
It's interesting you say that, because I often think, when somebody talks about respect, and to me, respect is remembering that whoever you're dealing with, that's somebody's mother or father, brother, sister, son or daughter. That kind of encompasses that they are somebody of infinite value to other people. So no matter what may be going on, we need to respect them and remember that.
yeah, which is a good place to remember. So Brian, thank you so much.
Welcome.
Like I said, I knew we were both going to cry at some point on here. That's the way we roll, man. But I really appreciate you, and appreciate you kind of taking this turn and writing this book too, because I know it's an important message that I need to hear, and I'm going to get a lot from reading the book myself too, but that other people need to hear as well.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Jason.
All right, thanks.